Shogun assassin.
When we're on a mission, I keep count of how many ninja my father kills. He says not to keep count, only to pray for their souls. But if I don't keep count, I don't know how many souls to pray for. So I keep count.
This is
The Hardcast. It's time for another blood-soaked episode of The Hardcast. I'm your host, Chris, and today I'm joined by Steven.
The man whose knight is Sozino.
Tonight's review/discussion is about the 1980 samurai action movie Shogun Assassin, directed by Robert Huston and starring Tomisaburo Wakayama. Wow, I needed some kind of tongue technique to say that shit.
Really?
Shogun Assassin was edited and compiled from the first two films in the Lone Wolf and Cub series, which is based off of the manga of the same name, written by Kazuo Koike. So, Steven, did Shogun Assassin teach you how to walk the bloody road of vengeance? Or did it end up making you feel like you were dumped down a well?
Well, I want to take that bloody road of vengeance, man. This movie, it definitely had some blood in there. Seriously, the
Rivers of blood.
Rivers of blood, man. Seriously, the sands themselves are covered in blood, literally. It's definitely old. It is way back in the past. But it works. Even a movie this classic still works even today. The way it is just classic sword fighting, shinobi style, ninja type guys, Japanese old-fashioned style. The Shogun Assassin himself. Overall, it's just ridiculous how it happens in this movie. Want to get into it?
I guess we could start with the basic premise of the movie. Apparently, the Shogun is gone insane. He is paranoid as hell, and he's basically taking out everyone who he think could be a possible threat to him. The story, the Shogun Assassin, the main character, Ogami Ito, he's the executioner, the official executioner, which is a position that's highly regarded, and you have to be one of the best samurai in Japan to even be offered that position. He's really scared of this guy because this guy is really, really powerful. He obviously thinks that this guy could be a problem down the line, so he's like, why don't I take him out now? So he sends ninjas to Ogami Ito's house to take him out in his night, in his sleep. They end up killing his wife and almost getting his kid, but he manages to get out of there with his son. Basically starts from there because once that happens, he knows who did this shit to him. He knows the Shogun's out for blood, and he's like, you want blood, Shogun? I'll give you blood.
He'll definitely give out that blood, man. He made a huge mistake by challenging him, man. Ogami was not playing around in this movie. He was not playing around. You mess with his family and friends, it's over. It's game over. The rivalry between the two is definitely one of the highlights for this movie because they just hate each other. You want to look at the definition of hate? You will see the Shogun Assassin and the freaking Shogun himself looking at each other face to face because those guys had it out for each other.
Oh, yeah, and the fucking auras about them, the way they would stare at each other, you could tell they would sacrifice everything just a chance to get at each other.
The Shogun was so old, and every time he'd look at the Ogami, he was never enough to fight him. He knew if he fought him, he would have lost himself. But still, he sent his best man.
It was like a giant chess game to him. He would be like, okay, this is your technique, I'll counter your technique with this guy, and I'll set up this situation so it'll be in my positive for me, in my favor. But no matter what, Ogami Ito would always come out on top, always find a way to counter any type of fucking strategy or ambush or something that the Shogun would come up with, and it would always backfire in his face. But the Shogun would never give up. He'd be like, all right, now I know a little bit more about you. I can try to find a way to beat you.
He perfects his sword fighting skills to the max, fighting his assassins. The rest of the movie plays out just like that. He's just taking his son, Daigoro, and he just goes city to city, town to town, trying to avoid the assassins that are being after him. He fights over and over. They build a routine, and the whole movie's narrated by Daigoros.
I know.
The whole movie's narrated by him.
Which we'll say, this is a huge difference from the actual Lone Wolf and Cub movies, which I also own. Daigoro has hardly any dialogue at all in those movies. But in this movie, he is the narrator. He is the one who's presenting the story to us, the viewers. I would say, for me, that's one of the highlights of Shogun Assassin. One of the areas that I kind of like it a little bit more than the actual Lone Wolf and Cub movies. Other than that, the Lone Wolf and Cub movies have better stories, more stuff going on, more action overall because of 6 movies. But this is actually the 2 movies edited together, the first 2. Mostly just the action sequences, and then they tone down the story a lot to make it simple. But it works, so I think it's cool. It's a nice, fun movie that can stand on its own. But definitely, Daigoro, man, he is one of my favorite characters in this movie.
His point of view is so childish, but at the same time, you see him mature from scene to scene to scene. One of the scenes, he's like, my father told me not to count how many people he's killed.
Yeah.
But he's like, I just have to count because I just need to know how many people he's...
No, he said, he tells him, he's counting the people that his father kills. And his father's like, don't count how many I kill. Just pray for them. And he goes... But I need to count for them because I need to know how many people to pray for. So it's just awesome, the dialogue and the way they do it. The way the writing for Daigoro is really good, and the voice actor for Daigoro is perfect. I mean, most of the time, 7-year-old kids and just kids in general in movies are so fucking annoying. But this kid is such a badass in this movie. He's insanely cool. And
he's a miniature G, man.
Exactly.
Seriously.
And then the guy, the kid who does the voice is just perfect. I don't know what it is. Just the right amount of maturity. He knows exactly what he's saying and the meaning behind his words. At the same time, this innocence. And we'll just mention right now a little trivia. The kid who did the voice for Daigoro was the 7-year-old son of the guy who did the illustrative, artwork for the poster for Shogun Assassin. So, I mean, that's pretty cool.
I loved watching his narration, man. From place to place, every time they stopped, he'd mention, my dad doesn't sleep anymore.
Oh, you got your crazy TV. It lets you watch narration instead of listen to it.
Yes, yes, not 60 by 9 TV. I can watch narration.
You get to watch 3D narration.
They were something else, man. You should see them sometime. For him, he said his dad wouldn't sleep anymore. The Shogun Ogami, he would never sleep anymore. He would always be on alert.
We'll mention that the Daigoro is being pushed around on this badass cart that is just full of weapons and it's all hidden.
Ultimate samurai cart, man.
It's got a little miniature tank or something. It's just, it can float in water. You can use it as a little raft. It's got spears that come out of the wheels, weapons that can pop out of the handles. It's just, it's a walking armory. I mean, not walking, a rolling armory.
A rolling armory. That's a good way to put it. It's like their own walking fortress. It's very small just for Daigoro, but it's enough. Whenever Ogami needed some weapons, he'd lose his sword or something, he'd just reach for the cradle and just pull out more weapons.
I love that shit too, because the guys with the ninjas with the chains would go like, okay, get his weapon away from him, and they'd wrap around his weapon and pull it out of his hand, and they'd be like, now we have you, and then he would just pull the fucking knife or sword out of the cart, and they'd be like, what the hell, and he'd be like raping them. Just
holding. He's like, you could take my sword, I got a better one right here.
Exactly.
Puts it together and starts a big old staff, like he starts wailing on all the guys. They're like, what the fuck? We take his weapon and he pulls out a bigger one. One of the scenes, there's a bunch of guys lined up to take him out, and he just pushes his son in the cart, and the cart pushes out all these wheels, the spikes in the wheels, and just cuts the guy's legs off. We mentioned the brutality in this movie. They didn't hold anything back. If someone gets cut, you're going to bleed.
Actually, this movie was really influential in a lot of people's lives as far as their love for Japanese samurai movies, because back in the 1980s, there weren't that many movies that were available in North America like this. And when this came out, it was one of the first movies where people got to see the infamous blood spray, where you cut someone's leg off or their head off, and you just see jets of just spraying everywhere, covering the camera screen even sometimes.
All the time, man. I love that shit.
Yeah, it's just a fucking hose going off. Body does not hold that much blood. Come on now. It's a geyser.
If you cut his neck, he'd bleed profusely, man, all over the place. I like how you mentioned the screen. That camera went through hell in this movie, man. Every other scene, you see blood splurting all over that camera lens. God, trying to wipe the TV or something, because there's just so much blood.
I know. And since this movie, you've seen stuff like that. If they did that in Kill Bill, I'm sure Quentin Tarantino was a huge Lone Wolf and Cub fan. This movie had a big influence on a lot of people who went on to make more movies.
It all goes back to the Shogun, man, because he wanted to kill Ogami really, really bad. He sent his best guys, subsequently getting tougher and tougher, gang up in numbers and trying to take him out. It's not enough. He sent better guys, less numbers, more and more and more. And
I'll just mention right now, in this movie, it's very simplified. You just see different ninjas, and then you see the female ninjas, which we'll get into soon. In the actual Lone Wolf and Cub movies and in the manga, it goes into more detail about the different clans and the different techniques and the reasons why they want Ogami dead and things like that. In this version, it's very simplistic. It's just the Shogun is like the king, and these are his soldiers, and he's sending them out to kill Ogami, and it's no matter what, kill Ogami. If you want a more complex storyline, definitely check out the Lone Wolf and Cub movies after seeing this movie.
Right. He sends his best guys. No matter what happens, they're not enough to take out Ogami. And even the mercenaries themselves, the ninjas themselves, they go to this Kunoichi group, the female ninjas.
Yeah.
The head mistress, she was a bitch, though, I gotta say. She was so snobby. It was ridiculous. Her girls were confident. Oh man, that little test they did, the guy was.
I did not think that test was fair at all, because the head ninja guy goes in and it's like, oh, you're just women. What can you do against Ogami Ito? My men have always been killed. She goes, who's your best guy? And so he picks his best guy.